Welcome to The Fear Files, where tonight we delve into three chilling tales of people who found themselves home alone, unbeknownst to them that they weren't quite as alone as they thought. Make sure the doors are locked and the lights are on as we embark on this terrifying journey.
Before Sarah's weekend of terror began, there was an unsettling discovery that set the stage for the horrors to come. It was a Friday afternoon, and Sarah was unpacking the last of her boxes, eager to settle into her new apartment. As she was arranging her books on the shelf, she noticed something peculiar. A small, dusty box tucked away in the corner of the closet. Curiosity getting the better of her, she pulled it out and opened it. Inside, she found a collection of old photographs, yellowed with age, depicting various people who had lived in the apartment over the years. One photo in particular caught her eye. It was a black and white image of a young woman standing in what appeared to be the very same living room. The woman had a hauntingly familiar look, almost as if she could be Sarah's twin. The resemblance was uncanny, sending a chill down Sarah's spine. As she examined the photo more closely, she noticed something even more disturbing, a shadowy figure lurking in the background, partially obscured by the curtains. The figure's presence was unsettling, its dark form contrasting sharply with the brightness of the room. Shaking off the eerie feeling, Sarah continued to sift through the box. She found old letters, diaries, and trinkets, each telling a story of the apartment's past residents. But the more she uncovered, the more she felt an inexplicable connection to the place, as if the apartment itself was trying to communicate with her. One letter in particular stood out. It was a farewell note from a previous tenant warning of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena that had driven them to leave. The note spoke of footsteps in the night, objects moving on their own, and a constant feeling of being watched. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the apartment held secrets, dark and hidden, waiting to be discovered. Little did she know this unsettling discovery was just the beginning, a prelude to the nightmare that was about to unfold. The sense of unease that had settled over her would soon give way to sheer terror as the apartment's dark history came to life in ways she could never have imagined. Sometimes the past has a way of haunting the present, and for Sarah, that haunting was about to become all too real. As Sarah's unease grew, she decided to take her mind off things by organizing the apartment. She had found a sense of comfort in keeping busy, hoping it would distract her from the unsettling feelings that haunted her every move. But as she arranged her belongings and tidied up, she stumbled across an old baby monitor tucked away in a drawer. It was an antique-looking device, much older than any modern baby monitor she had seen before. The device seemed out of place, a relic from a different time, and it piqued her curiosity. She decided to plug it in, thinking it might be interesting to see if it still worked. As she turned it on, the monitor crackled to life, emitting a low, static hum. Sarah watched the screen, expecting to see nothing but static. But then the screen flickered and an image began to form. It was faint, barely visible, but it was there, a dimly lit room with shadows dancing on the walls. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized the room on the screen looked eerily similar to her own living room. The same furniture, the same layout, everything was identical. She leaned in closer, trying to make out more details, her heart pounding in her chest. And then she saw it, a figure standing in the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light. It was the same shadowy figure from the photograph, the one that had been lurking in the background. The figure stood motionless, its presence sending a chill down Sarah's spine. She felt a wave of panic wash over her, and she quickly turned off the monitor, hoping to erase the image from her mind. But the sense of dread lingered, gnawing at her, refusing to let go. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the figure was somehow connected to her, to the apartment, to the unsettling discovery she had made. Sarah tried to rationalize what she had seen, convincing herself it was just a trick of the light, a glitch in the old monitor. But deep down she knew there was something more to it, something she couldn't explain. The apartment was hiding secrets, dark and terrifying, and she was only beginning to uncover them. The baby monitor had shown her a glimpse of the darkness that lurked within the walls, a darkness that was growing ever closer, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. As she sat in the silence of her apartment, the weight of the discovery pressed down on her. The past was not just a distant memory, it was alive, breathing, and it had its eyes set on her. Sarah realized that the baby monitor was more than just a device. It was a window into the unknown, a connection to the horrors that were about to unfold. and she was standing on the brink, teetering on the edge of a nightmare from which there might be no escape. The next morning, Sarah couldn't shake the terror of the previous night. The figure, the knocks, the eerie voice, everything felt like a waking nightmare. Determined to find answers, she decided to dig deeper into the history of her apartment. She hoped that understanding its past might shed light on the strange occurrences. She headed to the local library, a place she had visited only a few times since moving to the neighborhood. The old building had an air of mystery about it, with rows of dusty bookshelves and the faint scent of aged paper. Sarah approached the reference desk, where an elderly librarian greeted her with a warm smile. "How can I help you today?" the librarian asked, her voice kind and gentle. "I'm looking for information about the apartment building I live in," Sarah replied. "It's on Maple Street, number 23. The librarian's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of concern. "Maple Street, number 23, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "That building has quite the history. Follow me." Sarah followed the librarian to a secluded corner of the library, where she pulled out an old leather-bound ledger from a high shelf. The book looked ancient, its pages yellowed with age. The librarian placed it carefully on the table and opened it to a section marked with a faded ribbon. "This ledger contains records of the buildings in our town," the librarian explained. "Maple Street, number 23, has always been a place of interest." As Sarah skimmed through the pages, she found mentions of the building dating back over a century. It had been a boarding house, a small hotel, and even a makeshift hospital during the war. But what caught her attention were the numerous reports of strange occurrences, disappearances, unexplained noises, and sightings of shadowy figures. One entry in particular stood out. It detailed the story of a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in the building in the 1920s. Eleanor had reported seeing a shadowy figure in her apartment, much like the one Sarah had seen. The report mentioned that Eleanor had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a cryptic note that read, "The darkness has found me." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the note. The parallels between Eleanor's experiences and her own were too striking to ignore. She knew she had to find out more about Eleanor and the other residents who had encountered the shadows. "Is there any way to find more information about Eleanor?" Sarah asked the librarian. The librarian nodded. "You might find more in the town archives. They're kept in the basement, but be careful. It's a bit eerie down there, especially for someone who's already shaken." Determined to uncover the truth, Sarah made her way to the basement. The dimly lit room was filled with rows of filing cabinets and boxes of old documents. She spent hours sifting through the records, piecing together the dark history of her apartment building. As she delved deeper, she discovered that Eleanor was not the only one who had vanished. Over the years, several residents had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, all leaving behind similar notes about the darkness. Sarah's unease grew with each new revelation, but she couldn't stop now. She had to know the truth. Finally, she found a photograph of Eleanor. The woman in the picture had a haunting beauty, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. Sarah felt a strange connection to her, as if their fates were somehow intertwined. With the photograph in hand, Sarah left the library, her mind racing with questions. Who was the shadowy figure? What was the darkness that had taken Eleanor and the others? And most importantly, how could she protect herself from the same fate? As she walked back to her apartment, the weight of the hidden history pressed down on her. The building she had thought was her safe haven was now a place of terror, its walls hiding secrets too dark to comprehend. Sarah knew she was not alone in her struggle. The spirits of the past were with her, guiding her towards the truth, but also warning her of the dangers that lay ahead. She realized that to survive, she would need to confront the darkness head-on. The shadows were closing in and time was running out. The baby monitor had shown her a glimpse of the horrors that awaited, but now, armed with the knowledge of the past, she was determined to uncover the full story and find a way to escape the nightmare that had become her reality. Determined to uncover the secrets of her apartment, Sarah returned to her home with the photograph of Eleanor. She placed it on her desk, staring into the eyes of the woman who had lived nearly a century ago. "What did you see, Eleanor?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "And why is it happening again?" That night, Sarah decided to set up a camera in the living room, hoping to capture any unusual activity. She connected it to her laptop, ready to record every moment. As she reviewed the footage from earlier, her heart skipped a beat. There in the corner of the screen was a fleeting shadow. It moved quickly, almost too fast to notice, but it was unmistakable. Sarah's mind raced. Could it be the same shadowy figure that Eleanor had seen? And if so, what did it want? She felt a strange sense of urgency, as if time was running out. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. The next day, Sarah decided to visit the apartment's previous tenants. She found an old address book in one of the filing cabinets in the basement of the library. Flipping through the pages, she found a name that stood out: Mrs. Agnes Thompson. She had lived in the apartment in the 1980s and had left abruptly. Sarah tracked down Mrs. Thompson, who now lived in a nursing home on the outskirts of town. The elderly woman welcomed Sarah with a warm smile, but her eyes held a hint of sadness. "You live in that apartment?" Mrs. Thompson asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I always knew someone would come looking for answers." Sarah explained her experiences and the strange occurrences she had encountered. Mrs. Thompson listened intently, nodding occasionally. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last," she said softly. "That place, it's haunted by something dark. I saw it too many years ago, a shadow always lurking, always watching." Mrs. Thompson recounted her own encounters with the shadowy figure, describing the same feelings of dread and unease that Sarah had experienced. "It feeds on fear," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The more afraid you are, the stronger it becomes." Armed with this new information, Sarah returned to her apartment with a renewed sense of determination. She knew she couldn't let fear consume her. She had to confront the darkness head-on, just as Eleanor and Mrs. Thompson had tried to do. That night, Sarah sat in her living room, the camera recording, and waited. Hours passed, the silence thick with anticipation, and then she saw it. The shadowy figure appeared, its form barely visible in the dim light, but this time Sarah didn't hide. She stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. The figure remained silent, but Sarah could feel its presence, oppressive and malevolent. She reached for the photograph of Eleanor, holding it up as if it were a shield. "I know what you did," she said, her voice unwavering. "You took Eleanor and you took the others, but you won't take me." The figure seemed to waver, its form flickering like a candle in the wind, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. Sarah felt a weight lift off her shoulders, the oppressive presence dissipating. She knew the battle was far from over, but she had taken the first step. The shadows might still be lurking, but Sarah was no longer afraid. She had faced the darkness and survived. And with the knowledge of the past, she was determined to uncover the full story and find a way to escape the nightmare that had become her reality. As she turned off the camera and prepared for bed, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. The shadows might be closing in, but she was ready to fight. And with each passing day, she grew stronger, more determined to uncover the truth and protect herself from the darkness that threatened to consume her. Sarah had just moved into a cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, eager for her independence. She had spent weeks searching for the perfect place, and finally she found it. The apartment was small but charming, with a warm, inviting atmosphere that made her feel at home instantly. She was excited to start this new chapter of her life, filled with the promise of new experiences and personal growth. But when her roommates went away for the weekend, she found herself feeling uneasy alone in the unfamiliar space. The silence that once felt peaceful now seemed oppressive, and every creak and groan of the old building set her nerves on edge. She tried to distract herself with movies and books, but the feeling of unease lingered, gnawing at the back of her mind. As night fell, a storm rolled in, rattling the windows. The wind howled through the trees outside, and the rain pounded against the glass, creating an eerie symphony that only heightened her anxiety. The flickering lights from the storm cast strange shadows on the walls, making her feel as though she was not alone. The sound of thunder made her jump as she heard a performance of multiple knocks echo through the hallway. She froze, her heart pounding in her chest, straining to hear over the storm. The knocks were deliberate, almost as if someone was trying to get her attention. She convinced herself it was just the wind. After all, it was a stormy night, and old buildings like this one were known to make strange noises. She took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing thoughts, telling herself that there was nothing to be afraid of. But each hour, she'd hear that knock, rhythmic and patient. It was as if someone was waiting for her to respond, testing her resolve. The sound seemed to grow louder with each passing hour, echoing through the empty apartment and making her feel more and more isolated. Was it a figment of her imagination, or was someone nearby? Then it started. The feeling of being watched, the sense that she was not alone in the apartment. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Her phone lit up with notifications, messages flooding in from her friends. She grabbed it, hoping for a distraction, but what she saw only made her heart race faster. But there was something off. The messages were frantic, filled with warnings and pleas for her to leave the apartment immediately. The messages were clear: get out of the house. Her friends had somehow sensed the danger she was in, even from miles away. Panicking, she grabbed her things, ready to leave. Her hands trembled as she stuffed her belongings into a bag, her mind racing with thoughts of what could be waiting for her outside the door. But just then she spotted movement out of the corner of her eye. A shadowy figure, barely visible in the dim light, standing at the end of the hallway. A dark figure stood at the end of her hallway, just beyond the reach of her lamplight. It was tall and menacing, its features obscured by the darkness. It was watching her, unmoving. The air grew thick with tension as she locked eyes with the figure, her breath catching in her throat. Just as she gathered the courage to confront her fear, the figure turned and disappeared into the shadows. She was left standing there, her heart pounding, unsure of what to do next. All her instincts told her to hide. She knew she couldn't face whatever was out there, not alone. She dove under the kitchen table, trembling, and listened. At first, nothing. The silence was deafening, each second stretching into an eternity. But then, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. The figure's footsteps grew louder, closer. Each step echoed through the apartment, sending chills down her spine, and then she heard it, a voice. "Where are you, Sarah?" It was soft, almost a whisper, but filled with malice, soft, malicious, echoing against the walls, the last message. It was as if the voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, surrounding her. A few seconds later, the front door creaked open, and then there was silence. No one came in. The door swung slowly on its hinges, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. But she felt someone was watching her. The feeling was so intense, it was almost tangible, like a weight pressing down on her. Sometimes, being home alone might just be the most dangerous position to be in. The sense of isolation, the vulnerability, the knowledge that there is no one to help you if something goes wrong. Sarah realized that night that the true terror of being alone is not the solitude itself, but the fear of what might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. Elena was a single mother, filled with love and hope for her new life. She cherished every moment with her baby, finding joy in the little things like the way her baby smiled or the soft coos that filled the room. She often relied on her baby monitor for peace of mind while handling chores around the house. A flickering light meant her baby was still safe. The monitor was her constant companion, a silent guardian that allowed her to move freely, knowing she could always hear her baby. But that night, against the backdrop of a heavy rainstorm, the monitor began to pick up more than just the sounds of her sleeping child. The rain pounded against the windows, creating an eerie atmosphere that made the house feel isolated and vulnerable. "Monitor," faint, distorted voice. "Elena, where are you?" The voice was faint, almost a whisper, but it was enough to make her blood run cold. Heart racing, she rushed to the monitor. Her baby was sound asleep, innocent and unchanged. But that voice, it sent chills down her spine. She tried to rationalize it, thinking it must be some kind of interference, perhaps from a neighbor's device. She dismissed it, telling herself it was just interference. But as the night progressed, the voice returned, clearer, more menacing. It seemed to be calling out to her, almost as if it knew her, as if it was waiting for her to respond. "Monitor. Elena, come play with me." The words were chilling, spoken with a tone that was both playful and sinister. Then a sound echoed, a soft laugh drifting through the air. It was coming from the baby room. She gripped the monitor tightly, her heart thudding in her chest. The laugh was innocent, yet it carried an undertone of something dark, something that didn't belong. Peeking inside, everything seemed normal, just the baby. But as she turned to leave, she felt a chill on her neck, as though someone was there with her. The room felt colder, the air heavier, as if an unseen presence was watching her every move. In a moment of desperation, she shouted, "Who's there?" The answer that came chilled her heart. It was a voice she had never heard before, yet it felt strangely familiar, as if it had been lurking in the shadows all along. "Monitor, Elena, I'm right behind you!" The words echoed in her mind, leaving her paralyzed with fear. She could feel the presence closing in, the darkness enveloping her as she struggled to comprehend the terror that had invaded her home. A group of friends, curious, adventurous, decided to spend a night in an abandoned house rumored to be haunted. They had heard countless stories about the place, tales of ghostly apparitions and unexplained noises that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who dared to listen, but to them it was just another adventure, a chance to prove their bravery and have some fun. They laughed off the urban legends, thinking the tales were merely stories crafted to scare children. They joked and teased each other, their laughter echoing through the empty halls, masking the unease that was slowly creeping into their hearts. But as the light from their flashlights flickered and shadows danced on the walls, they began to feel the weight of the house's history, the screams of the past echoing in the present. The air grew colder, and the once playful atmosphere turned ominous.
Come on, it's just the wind. One of them tried to reassure the group, but his voice wavered, betraying his own fear.
Or something else. Another whispered, her eyes wide with terror, as she glanced around the darkened room.
Then it happened, a sudden deafening noise that seemed to come from nowhere, making their hearts race and their blood run cold. A loud crash shattering the laughter, silencing their bravado. The sound was so intense, it felt as if the very walls were closing in on them. The noise came from above them, a clear thud resonating through the rotting floorboards. They exchanged nervous glances, each one wondering if they should investigate or flee.
"Let's just go home already," one of them pleaded, her voice trembling with fear.
Don't be a chicken, I'm going up, another declared, trying to muster up some courage, though his hands shook as he gripped the flashlight.
Step by step, they climbed the creaking staircase, each step filled with dread. The air grew heavier and the silence was almost deafening, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. They reached the landing and suddenly, the door to a bedroom slammed shut by itself, startling them all. The force of the slam sent a gust of wind that chilled them to the bone.
"That was creepy," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might provoke whatever was lurking in the shadows.
They entered, scanning the darkness. Their flashlights revealed nothing but empty space, yet the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. The air was thick, an undeniable presence looming in the corners of the room. It felt as if the walls themselves were whispering secrets of the past.
"Guys, let's go now," she urged, her voice filled with urgency and fear, as if staying any longer would seal their fate.
They fumbled in the dark, panic rising. Their once steady hands now shook uncontrollably as they tried to find their way back. As they struggled to turn their lights back on, a scream pierced the silence. A blood-curdling, agonizing cry. It was a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of despair. Frozen in terror, they stared as the figure moved closer, revealing its ghastly face, a twisted expression that caused their skin to crawl. The figure seemed to float, its eyes hollow and filled with an unending sorrow.
What do you want from us? He shouted, his voice breaking, as if hoping for an answer that would make sense of the nightmare they were living.
In that moment, the house bled memories of sorrow and despair, and they realized they weren't alone. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, each beat echoing the pain of those who had come before. They had awakened something dormant, something that craved not just their fear, but their very souls. The realization hit them like a tidal wave, and they knew they had to escape before it was too late.
3 stories, 3 different nights where solitude turned into terror. Each tale serves as a reminder. Being alone can unveil more than just darkness. It can invite the unknown. So the next time you find yourself home alone, remember, you might not be as alone as you think. Good night and sleep tight if you can.